We are officially in the month of March, which means we're entering the business stage of the Premier League season. And when I was looking at the table earlier, I was trying to figure out for myself who I thought was going to get relegated. But the conclusion that I came to is that I think this Premier League relegation race is an absolute mess. And I'll come on to exactly what I'm talking about later on in this video. But I was looking at the table and I was trying to figure out which teams are actually in the relegation race. Well, if I'm being honest, we all like to banter Chelsea, but they're clearly not in the relegation race. Fulham, I think similarly as well. I think under Marco Silva, they'll be absolutely fine. Crystal Palace, you maybe can make an argument, but I think under new manager Oliver Glasner, there'll be a new manager bound. I think with Eze apparently being back soon, I think they'll be fine. Bournemouth, I know they're in a bad run of form at the moment, but I think they'll be fine under Iraola, and I think Dominic Solanke will continue to back the goals. And then I thought to myself, Sheffield United and Burnley, are they realistically still in the fight? I think, if we're being honest, I think we all think they're down. They're only averaging 0.5 points per game, which means that they'll end of the season on 19 points each. Obviously, that isn't enough to keep themselves safe. So I think really the teams who are actually in the race to stay up are Luton Town, Nottingham Forest, Brentford and Everton. And then I was trying to find the best way to figure out which of those teams is going to get relegated and which of the other three are going to stay up. And so what I thought I was look at is the fixture difficulty. And in my research I found this photo, which was in The Athletic, and I'm not sponsored by The Athletic, I'm not promoting them, I just want to give credit to where I originally found this photo. And in this photo it's the remaining 12 games, or in Luton's case 13, of the bottom 6 sides in the Premier League and the fixture difficulty. And so what The Athletic have done here is they've given green for a fixture which is easy, the white fixtures are the ones that are of medium difficulty, and the red fixtures are the hard fixtures. So if you break down the remaining sides, and I'm not going to really discount Burnley and Sheffield United because I think they're relegated. Some of you might agree, some of you won't, but I'm going to discount them. Luton obviously have 13 games, but the other three, Nottingham Forest, Brentford and Everton, all have 12 fixtures left. Everton have 12 games, 5 of them are easy, 5 of them are medium, and 2 of them are hard. Brentford, 12 games, 4 are easy, 4 are medium, and 4 are hard. Nottingham Forest, exactly the same as Brentford, 4 easy, 4 medium, 4 hard. Luton Town, obviously with the game extra, 13 games, 4 easy, 5 medium and 4 hard. So Brentford, Nottingham Forest and Luton all have 4 fixtures of hard difficulty, whereas Everton only have 2. And I thought to myself, right, the fixtures in terms of difficulty on paper, they're all of a very similar ilk. And then I thought to myself, right, let me try and figure out the points per game of the remaining sides, and let's try and figure out where they'll end up at the end of the season. And so I found myself doing some basic calculations to try and figure out, based on the points per game that each team has accumulated so far this season, how many points they'll end up at the end. And so, yes, I am using Microsoft Word here to demonstrate this. Give it the video like if you like Microsoft Word. It was just the easiest way to demonstrate what I'm on about. So, Everton, without the point deduction, they would actually be on 31 points. Obviously, we all know they've got a point deduction of 6 points, they're on 25 points. But if it wasn't for that, they'd be on 31 points, and their points per game would be 1.19. And if you times that for the rest of the season, that means that Everton would actually end up on, now let's see if this works, highlight that in red, 45 points. That works, that's great. Brentford, who are on 25 points, are averaging 0.96 points per game. And for the rest of the season, if they carry on like that, that means they'll end up on 37. Nottingham Forest, they're on 24 points at the moment. Their points per game is 0.92. And if they continue to average that for the rest of the season, they'll end up on 35. And Luton Town, their points per game is 0.8. And if you multiply that for the rest of the season, Luton Town will end up on 30 points. And you might be thinking to yourself, oh, that's pretty straightforward. So what on earth am I on about that it's such a mess, the relegation battle? Well, let's start off with Everton, because as we know, they're not actually on 31 points. That's if you don't take into account the point deduction. But obviously, as we know, they do have a point deduction. They're actually on 25 points because they've got 6 points deducted, which was reduced from 10, thankfully for Everton fans, because if it wasn't, then they could be in bigger trouble than they already are. So we know that if we take into account the points, 1.19 points per game for the rest of the season, they'll actually end up on 39 points because they'll have a 6-point deduction. And so from 45 to 39, from comfortably avoiding relegation to now only just avoiding relegation, which I think is fine. I mean, still 9 points to Luton. Nothing to worry about, you think to yourself, right? Well, now let's add another asterisk, because as we know, Everton, for breaking profit and sustainability rules, are being charged again. So now you think to yourself, how many points are Everton actually going to be deducted? Now let's assume for the worst case scenario, and I think that's what Sean Dyche, his team, and Everton Football Club should be assuming, that the worst case scenario, Everton get deducted another 6 points, right? Obviously, that might not necessarily happen because they've already been charged once. They might get charged for a lesser amount, maybe 2 or 3 points. But let's assume it's the worst case scenario. 33 points they'll end up with if they carry on with the gathering the amount of points they have so far this season. Now, that's a lot closer to Luton Town's 30. Now where things get really interesting and really messy, and why it was so hard for me to figure out who was going to get relegated was, now let's add an asterisk to Nottingham Forest. Because as we know, along with Everton, Nottingham Forest are being charged for breaking profit and sustainability rules, and it seems like they are likely to get a point deduction or some sanction of that kind. So let's assume, like Nottingham Forest should do, similar to Everton, that's going to be the worst case scenario. Well, thankfully for Nottingham Forest, Everton have already appealed and there has now been a precedent set. And that means that 6 points is likely, not definitely, but likely going to be what they're going to get if they're found guilty. So now from 35 to 29. And that means that Nottingham Forest would be relegated. And now that's worrying for Nottingham Forest, because that is if the worst case scenario were to happen, which, in all honesty, is a likelihood, is a possibility that could happen. And that could mean that as the season goes on, if Nottingham Forest and Luton Town can't get in the points they're going to get, the Nottingham Forest are going to get relegated. What this means for certainty, I think, is that Brentford are probably going to be fine. Brentford on 37 points with no breaches, no profit and sustainability issues hanging over their head. Brentford will be fine carrying on with 37 points with the 0.96 points per game. Obviously, I think they're in a bit of a bad run at the moment, but I think Ivan Toney, with the players coming back from injuries, the AFCON players, fully integrating back into the side, I think Brentford will be fine. But Everton, Nottingham Forest and Luton Town are the sides who are at risk of being relegated realistically. But now, Nottingham Forest fans, you're thinking to yourself, oh God, we're going to get relegated. So is there any small crumb of comfort I can give you? Well, there is one, and that's that the points per game of 0.92 has been calculated for the entirety of the season. And you might be thinking to yourself, well, we didn't have Nuno Espirito Santo for the whole season. We actually had Steve Cooper, who a lot of you think was unfairly sacked, and I think, to be fair myself, was slightly unfairly sacked. But let's say, for example, we take into account Nuno's points per game, and we don't include Steve Cooper's into that, which is a bit of an asterisk in itself, but, let's see. So in the 17 games that Steve Cooper played, he got 14 points from the 17 games, which is a points per game of 0.82. So what's Nuno Espirito Santo averaging? Well, his points per game, Nuno's, is actually 1.11 when you round it. And now you think to yourself, right, that's not a massive increase from the whole seasons of 0.92, but could it mean that actually Nottingham Forest end up with a couple more points? It does. And what it means is, if you take into account Nuno's points per game, Nottingham Forest will end up on 31 points at the end of the season, which is only 1 point more than Luton Town if Nottingham Forest get sanctioned -6 points for breaking profit and sustainability rules. And this is what I mean by, I think the Premier League season and the relegation battle is a mess. I think it's a farce. I think it's a comedy club. Because Everton have 2 breaches, Nottingham Forest have 1 breach, and then you've got Brentford and Luton, the teams who I think are in the relegation race, along with Everton and Nottingham Forest, who are desperately trying and hoping for the Premier League to sort their act out together, for the independent panel to sort their act out together, and get all of these notices for these teams sorted before the end of the season. Because we could end up with a situation in which we don't know which teams are actually relegated until weeks after the end of the season, which is simply unacceptable. If you think about the amount of money that goes into a football club and the amount of changes that a team will have to make if they're in the Premier League or if they're in the Championship, it's huge. You're going to have to lay people off at the club, you're going to have to sell players, you're going to have to buy players, and the fact that there's some teams who may be relegated will not be able to account for that until weeks after the Premier League season has finished is simply unacceptable, and simply the Premier League needs to sort it out before the end of the season so teams know on the final day who's actually relegated and who's not. Because Nottingham Forest, Luton Town, Everton, I think all 3 of them, with the points deductions that Everton and Nottingham Forest have, are in a really, really precarious situation, and for best parties, I think they need to get it sorted before the end of the season. But one big caveat to that is that we're assuming that they're going to carry on getting the same amount of points per game as they have been for the entirety of the season. So let's go back to the fixtures. And then when you look at the fixtures again, I think you can really pinpoint some of the key battles remaining in the season. I think Everton have Nottingham Forest at home, Brentford at home, Luton away, which is going to be absolutely massive. 3 games before the end of the season. Brentford have Luton away and Everton away, which is going to be massive. And then Nottingham Forest have Luton away and Everton away, which is going to be massive. But I think what's going to be key is Everton is probably the only team which can't leave it to the last game week of the season, because they've got Arsenal away, Arsenal who are having a fantastic season, chasing for the title, and you do not want to be going to the Emirates when they're trying to chase a Premier League title. It could be absolutely impossible for Everton to get a point in that game. Not completely, but looks very unlikely. Brentford have Newcastle at home, Nottingham Forest have, who is that? Burnley away, who probably will already be relegated, and Luton have Fulham at home, who will probably be on the beach. I think Nottingham Forest have the hardest immediate fixtures, and so therefore they're more likely to have to leave it later on in the season. Luton, I think, similarly have a medium difficulty for the remaining 5 fixtures, so I think it could be one where they could have a real surge towards the end, but I think at the beginning of the remaining of the fixtures, I think they could find it a little bit tough, and I think Brentford are obviously going to be fine. But all in all, I think it's just an absolute mess, and I think the Premier League needs to sort it out with the point deduction, and every team needs to know sooner rather than later. But I know what I've been saying. I'm saying it's a mess, but who do I think is actually going to get relegated? Well, that's tough. I think Luton are the favourites at the moment, say if everything stays the way it is. I think if Everton get another point deduction, I think it'll be difficult, but I think they will still be fine. I think with Dominic Calvert-Lewin, I think if you start scoring some goals, which he hasn't been at the moment, I think they'll be fine. I think with the set pieces and the defending, they're pretty good. I think Brentford, without any point deduction, will be fine. And I think it's between Nottingham Forest and Luton Town, who I think is going to go down. The amount of points that Nottingham Forest get is going to be massive. And I think, if I'm being honest, I think with the momentum, I think it will be Luton Town who avoid relegation, and that is if Nottingham Forest get a 6-point deduction. I think they're in trouble. I think Luton, who have faced adversity from the moment they've been in the Premier League, I think they'll be able to galvanise after that. And I think with their fixtures towards the end of the season, I think they'll be fine. Whereas I think Nottingham Forest, it might come as a bit of a blow, and there might be a bit of desperation from Nuno Espirito Santos and the Nottingham Forest players in the club in general. So I think for me, I think Luton will stay up if Nottingham Forest get a points deduction, and if the point deduction is 6 points. Anything less, so say if it is 5, I don't know, if it is 4, I don't know, maybe it is 3, I think I'd still back Nottingham Forest to stay up. But I think it just goes to show what a mess the relegation battle has been, and I think the Premier League season as a whole, and it really impacts the credibility. Let me know who you think will get relegated in the comments below, depending on the different scenarios that are presented to you, and I'll see you guys in the next one.